Welcome to If Prices Could Talk, the podcast where we dive into the art and science of pricing, sales, and negotiation. I'm your host, Tracy Dent. Join me as we explore strategies and current events shaping the future of pricing power in B2B, featuring insights from industry leaders and subject matter experts. Let's jump into today's conversation. Vanessa, Brian, thank you both for being here. Appreciate the time. It's great to have you both on here because I wanted to get both of your perspectives on some of these large negotiations that you've been part of. So, given how long you've known each other, first of all, Brian is the president and CEO of Holden Advisors. Vanessa has been a long-term friend of the firm. Brian, can you talk to us a little bit about how you know each other?
For sure. So Vanessa and I have been working together for close to a decade, and we've had the opportunity to work both on just sort of the training aspect, um, how to train her team in the most effective way possible, and then we've also done some very specific deal coaching in negotiations together, and it's fantastic. I'm learning from Vanessa as she's learning from me in terms of how to do things in different countries, different situations, and it's been a really cool partnership for the two of us. So it's great to have Vanessa here on the podcast.
Love it. And then, Vanessa, can you tell us a little bit about your background and some of your experience?
Sure. Yes, I've been working for the last few decades in financial services and data management, specifically credit, fraud, and income verification. So, I work in a highly competitive space. There's sort of a concentration of players, and it has been particularly important for me to hone my negotiation skills and to really lean into the training that Holden Advisors has provided over the years. And then I also was able to benefit from some monthly coaching with Brian, as Brian mentioned, some very specific deal-based coaching. There are some negotiations that stand out as being particularly challenging and where I may have felt a little out of my depth. And the coaching I received and the assistance I received was really invaluable. So it's been a great 10-year journey. Looking forward to more learning and developing together.
Yeah. There's so many things that we could unpack because I think there's understanding what you've seen in negotiations. I'm like, there's so many stories that you two have seen just in terms of what works, some of the tactics that have been used against you just in trying to get prices down. So I want to get into that and see if you can kind of share some of your insights over all these years of being on the front lines of this and leading the teams.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Happy to do that.
All right, cool. So can you tell me, like, what are some of the types of negotiations or deals that you have seen the most over the years?
Yeah, so I think it's been a wide variety. If I had to kind of put it in two categories, one would be the buyer category, the kind of traditional, they're buying what we're selling category. And then the second would be very material partnerships where we're more co-delivering services and solutions. And we have some customers in common, we have some customers that are unique, but they're both the deal is material, very material to both parties. So I think kind of traditional buyers and then partnerships are been the two main areas I've been focused on.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's something that makes you really unique, Vanessa, is that you get to see it from a couple of different sides. A lot of leaders get to see when they are the buyer and when they are the seller, but not everybody gets to see the when they are partnering with somebody. And sometimes it's a pure partnership, and sometimes it's a little bit of a co-opetition where you're partnering, but not 100%. And how do you approach a partnership differently than you approach just a pure selling scenario?
Yeah, I actually find maybe this is just a personal thing, but I find working with partners to be easier than in a traditional buyer seller relationship. We have a mutual vested interest. We usually are like-minded. If we're not in the same industry, we're in an adjacent industry. So I really have taken a lot out of working with partners, learning from partners. I think on the challenging side of working with partners, they're not always 50-50, right? You'd like to think that when you approach a partnership, opportunity, everyone's going in with their own and their partner's best interest in mind, but people do come into those situations with preconceived notions on, who's larger, who has more influence, who has more to gain, who has more to lose. So I suppose that's true for any buyer seller situation, but I especially find that in partnerships.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that in our experiences together that makes you a successful sales leader is that you don't enter a negotiation thinking winner and loser. You're trying to solve for something that's going to do the best for your customer and of course for your own company. But there's not that animosity, and I would think that that plays well in the partnership space because there should be absolutely a win-win. So that's even clearer in that scenario.
Without question. And I find that is a different level of excitement with that too, because you don't have that kind of adversarial starting point. You don't have some friction you might normally find in a buyer seller situation where you're in an RFP and competing with three of your closest competitors. It's really more of kind of excitement out of the gate. I can't wait to get started. I can't wait to see what we can do together. So now that doesn't mean that it's not, full of its own complexities and challenges. It certainly is, especially when, again, there may be kind of some lopsided viewpoints. But and that's really one that's top of mind because I spent 3 years on one particular partnership negotiation. That is a record for me, and one I will never forget or not soon forget. So the complexities are vast, but and definitely the dynamic is different.
Yeah. How does the buying center, I recall the scenario that you're referring to. How does the buying center change? Like, as salespeople over the years, we've seen the buying center go from 5 people to 8 people to feels like 20 people every time you try to sell something. In a partnership back and forth, are there more people in the buying center, less? How's that dynamic different?
I tend to find there's more. And there's more at every stage along the journey. So even if you don't think there's more when you embark upon that journey with a partner or a prospective partner, there ends up being more.
Mm.
So it's kind of surprising sometimes exactly how many people can kind of come out of the woodwork in a partnership along the way. And on that subject of the buying center, I think one of the things I think about a lot as a leader and a seller and negotiator is it's really, really important to have that buying center be far and wide. In a partnership opportunity, you could be speaking with people on a daily basis for upwards of 3 years, as I just shared. You get really close to the individuals that you're working with on the other side. You understand the culture, the dynamics, the politics in their organization. And it's very easy to just have them be your eyes and ears of the organization, but you really need to be deeper and wider because over 3 years in that example, a lot can change.
Mm.
And you can't put all your eggs in that one kind of proverbial basket. It's really, really important to invest the time and energy into a large buying center.
That's really good advice on both on the just a pure buyer seller and on the partnership. I think all of us oftentimes lock into the 1 or 2 people who are our quote unquote friends that tell us stuff. And then sometimes you get to the end of the deal and they're like, yeah, we're gonna go a different direction. And you find out there's this other person who's got tremendous influence that you've never even heard of before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or resources
They
change
leave.
along the way.
Right.
A lot of people move around. That's
Sure.
commonplace, or their roles change, or their influence change, their leaders change, and now they're not as influential as they once were. So yeah, anything can evolve along the way. And I really wanted to I know the buying center is kind of a core tenet of Holden Advisors coaching and training. I really just wanted to emphasize that because it's something I need to keep top of mind all of the time.
Mhm.
As you just said, Brian, it's very easy. And I have built friendships with many of the people I've negotiated with, customers, partners over time, and those friendships remain, but that can't be everything in the
Right.
negotiation.
Right.
Yeah. Will be good to unpack one of these big negotiations. I don't know if it's the 3-year one or if there's a different one that you'd like to tell us about, but let's see if you can kind of let us like under the hood of one of these. How does it play out? What were some of your big takeaways? Do you want to talk about that one, or is there another
Sure.
one that you think would be better?
I'll talk
Okay.
about that one because it dabbled in a little bit of everything, that particular
Yeah.
negotiation. So one of the things that really stood out to me, and I found it to be extremely challenging when I was living it, and then in hindsight, a real learning opportunity, is it didn't feel like two parties in that negotiation. It felt like four. It felt like there were two factions on the partner side and two factions on my organization's side. And the two in the middle were trying to find the common ground, but then we had the two on the peripheries that were diametrically opposed, incongruent. There's lots of descriptors I could use for that. So how do you march forward with four different factions who are not all at the table at the same time and who are so very far apart? So we had to kind of walk a fine line because we had to remember the two factions that were at the table. We had to remember which side of the table we were on and which organization we worked for, even though we were sometimes sharing in frustrations on, okay, we came to an agreement, but now we can't get the broader group on your side or the broader group on my side to agree. So I think having, maybe there's four factions all of the time, and it was just never so pronounced as it was in this particular negotiation. But that was one thing. And how do you get the four groups to continue moving forward progress? The other thing that was difficult in this negotiation, and is probably part of the reason it took as long as it did, is it didn't feel like a mutually beneficial situation. It felt lopsided. It felt like one party maybe thought they were needed more than the other party, or they were in a more advantageous position than the other party. And that can be very difficult because as you're making progress, as you're coming to logical conclusions on the path forward, that's more of an emotional piece of, I'm needed more. I'm throw my weight around more, and that could kind of cause us to take some steps backwards. So I think that is part of the reason that it took as long as it did. So I remember coming to Holden advisors a few times and saying, how do you overcome that kind of notion, that conception? And you guys really, really helped me a lot on communicating mutually beneficial value, both parties winning, both parties feeling great at the conclusion of the deal, and saying it in a way that doesn't alienate the other party on the side of the table, but yet still gets your point across crystal clear and helps to hit a bit of a reset button. And then the third thing that happened in that negotiation was, we've talked before about time can kill deals, right? And the more time you have, it's not the better. So in this particular case, though, I think time was essential for this deal. I think it's maybe the 80-20 rule, and this was the 20% of the time where we needed the time to elapse. We needed circumstances to change. We needed some market factors to evolve. And I don't think it could have been done in much less time. We may have been able to shave some months, but certainly not some years from it. So that's a really, practical example of feeling like you were in a lopsided partnership, and how do we find that 50-50 common ground to get this deal done?
Mhm.
And we did.
3 years is such a long time, right? Of like, there were probably so many points where you're like, all right, this is not happening. Let's just let it
Many.
go.
Yeah.
Many. And as a matter of fact, I started to ask myself, am I throwing good time and money after bad? Am I being stubborn here by not refusing to let this one go? And I asked myself those questions, and the team asked themselves those questions many, many times. And at the end of the day, the underpin of it all was, we knew this was the right thing for our organization. We knew this was the right thing for the partners organization. And there was no doubt that it was in the best interest of each of our customers. So when you have that North Star, we just kept going, and fortunately, it came to a favorable conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great way to say that. It's in the customer's best interest on a partnership deal like that. I love that because it is that guiding light where, you're like, where do we go from here? And it's like, well, I don't know what's best for the customer. And I
Exactly.
think if we keep that in mind, then you're in a pretty good spot. Yeah.
Exactly. And there was never any equivocation on those points. There was certainly equivocation on you're on this far side, we're on this far side right now, but there was never equivocation that this was in the best interest of both of our customers.
Hmm.
Mm. Was there, can you talk about sort of the cadence of how this unfolded? Were there regular meetings? Was it very like quiet and then came back into the picture? What was it like over the course of the 3 years?
There was a regular cadence because there were some other dynamics at play. There was already some business that was occurring between our two companies, so we needed to have a regular cadence anyway. There was, pardon me, there was also business occurring in other geographies, so um, the cadence was regular, the communication was regular, and again, I think to my earlier point, sometimes we needed the time and for some other things to transpire, which just helped repoint both of us in the same direction.
Yeah.
But there were also quiet periods, and quiet periods are challenging, especially when you're, passionate and spirited and motivated to get that done. And it was a very impactful deal as well. And so it was kind
Mhm.
of like, we do this or else, but that wasn't a helpful posture for us in the negotiation. So yeah, there were definitely some quiet periods where I really had to persuade the team that this was necessary and that this was positive and that we had to lean in to the quiet periods.
Yeah, those are tough too because you like when you don't have the data from the other side, the loudest chirps are like the internal dialogue of what it means, right?
Absolutely. And oh God, if this doesn't happen, and what if, and or else, and all of those sweeping statements start to come out of the woodwork. And people
Mm.
think about their own futures. They think about the future of being able to make things a success with or without. And all of that starts to come into the equation. And so it's super important to just try to put that noise to the side and be comfortable with those quiet periods.
That's a major statement there, Vanessa, is being comfortable with the quiet. All negotiations are going to have some period of time where you're like, we gave them our best offer, they haven't responded. And I would say the less experienced or less educated seller fills that gap with a discount perhaps or some thing that they're giving for free. Like, well, what if we did this? Or what if we did that? And all it does is feed the buyer to say, geez, I didn't say anything and I got something good. Maybe I'll just stay quiet longer and see if I get more good.
Absolutely.
Right.
Counterproductive, counterintuitive, and not does not send the right signals
Mhm.
to the other party. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I work really, really hard on my team on that very concept because sometimes they would come to me after and say, well, I just checked in with them or I just sent them a note. And I'd be like, no, 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 that's exactly what we should not be doing right now. That's another thing when the other party says, I need 2 weeks, give it to them. Listen to them and give it to them.
Mhm.
Don't pepper them throughout the 2 weeks. You're not doing what they asked. Like believe them and give it to them, even if it's uncomfortable for you.
Right.
Yeah. Tough.
Very.
Tough, sure.
Yeah.
So, are there one or two pivotal moments from this entire thing that you're like, that's when things shifted, or that's when it really moved forward, or we tried this for the first time and that kind of moved us in a different direction? Are there things like that that stand out?
Yes. So one of the things that I realized, so you recall my mentioning of it felt like four factions, right? So
Mhm.
for the other faction on my side in my organization, I broadened the group. I felt like we were just locking horns, and I was trying to, of course, remember that my organization is who I represent, but I was also trying to give them insight into how the buyer or the partner felt, and we weren't getting, we weren't getting any additional progress there. So I broadened. I asked if more parties could, become involved, more heads are better, and it actually broke the logjam, which I was hopeful and optimistic that it might, but I
Yeah.
honestly thought this is probably dead in the water. And another perspective came in, someone in the organization who I really, really trusted their judgment and their opinion, and they broke the logjam. So that really stood out. Another thing that happened in this negotiation is, I know in the Holden training, I think you call it the knight riding in on a horse at the
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
savior.
the white horse,
Night.
the
White
white
horse
horse syndrome. Yeah.
Yes, white horse syndrome. That definitely happened on both sides. And when the knight on a white horse was riding in, um, one of the things I did that was very, very effective is we had to meet that riding in kind of savior behavior on our side. And I was in such lockstep with the person who was going to be kind of going toe to toe with the knight. And I remember we did some kind of pre-calls and prep work, and we were getting ready to have the meeting, and the meeting got rescheduled. And I thought, okay, well, we've done all our prep work, we've done on our call, we're ready, even though it's going to be 2 weeks later. And then something just didn't feel right of, that was 2 weeks ago. A lot happens in 2 weeks. I think we better get on the phone one more time right before this pivotal meeting happens. And it's a really good thing we did, because what happened in the ensuing 2 weeks is leaders are busy. C-suite is busy. They've got many material things on their plate on any given day. And they tend to, have their own narrative on what's worked well for them before and how they've gotten out of situations that seem to be very problematic and challenging. And it had slipped in the 2 weeks. It had slipped. It had gone from stick to the plan, this is exactly what we need to say, this is exactly what we need to do, to where that leader's comfort zone was. So having that intervention right before that next meeting ended up sealing the deal.
Yeah.
It ended up
That's
in 7 minutes. We had the thumbs up
Crazy.
that's great.
after
Yeah.
3 years. Yeah. So it was worth those pre-calls on top of pre-calls on top of pre-calls, particularly in that situation.
Yeah. And then just for folks who aren't familiar with the white horse syndrome, we've all felt it. As a senior sales leader, oftentimes, you're thinking to yourself, I have to make sure that my team holds the line in a negotiation, that they don't acquiesce, they don't give, consolation here or there. But oftentimes the bigger problem is the C-suite. And so that super senior leader, whoever it is, rides in on their white horse and says, I will save the deal. Here's my business card. You have any problem, you call me directly. And all it does is undermine everybody below them that's been trying to work this deal forever. So you make a really good point that when it's about being on the same page, it's not just the sales team, it's up the chain of command as well.
And just really critical to stick to the plan. I mean, I think about two things in that scenario. I think about, first of all, you entrusted these people to work on your largest accounts, your most influential opportunity. You entrusted them for a reason. And just because things are getting squirrely at the 11th hour, that doesn't mean, don't assume that they've done a bunch of things wrong and that you need to save the day with your narrative that always works well for you. Great intentions, right? No nefarious intentions there, but just because it works well for you over there, it doesn't mean that was the plan over here, and you need to stick with that plan. Get it done.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So there's maybe if we get out of this example so that you can talk to us about some of the mischief that happens in some of these big negotiations, because I bet over the years you've seen so many attempts at bluffing and some of these poker playing tactics that have sometimes worked and sometimes the team has seen right through them. First, let's get into the buyer types so we can kind of context for the poker player. Maybe
Yeah.
Brian can do that. If Brian can walk through, like, here's the four buyer
Sure.
types that we see. And then Vanessa, let's get into the poker playing tactics. And you can kind of show us like what are some of the things that you've seen that were most surprising to you, the things that worked and didn't work, and we'll head there.
Yeah, great. So we've been doing research at Holden Advisors for decades and come to the conclusion that there are really four distinct buyer types. There are price buyers who, no kidding, only want the lowest price. Will switch constantly and there's no games being played. They just want the lowest price. There are value buyers who really understand what they're looking for. They understand what the vendor or partner provides. They're willing to switch for better value and they've got their arms around that. There are relationship buyers folks who may not even go to an RFP. They are saying, hold my hand through this process, do me right, and let's just work together because I don't have any expertise in this. And then there are the poker players. And the poker player is a value or relationship buyer who is pretending to be a price buyer. And that's where a lot of times procurement or an outside consultant will come play this role. And they are doing the bluffing and they've got a whole bag of tricks that they bring to bear in order to extract better deals, more discounts, whatever it is, get the best deal for their side. Those are the poker players.
Yeah. I mean, that low price.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say there was definitely some poker playing going on this case study negotiation I've been referencing today. And it was pretty extreme statements with potentially extreme consequences. So the two things we heard the most that seemed to me like poker playing tactics, but were concerning nonetheless, were we would get to a particular term or condition or arrangement in the deal, and they would say, well, this is how we do it at our organization. There's no room here. This is how we've always done it. This is how we do it with everyone. And you basically need to get in where you fit in with that. And, we'd be sitting on the other side of the table like, well, hold on, this negotiation has just started on this point. How are we just receiving your terms? And that's the end of the story, kind of like it or lump it. And I remember when we would, go back and regroup, the team would be like, well, this is trouble because that's their bottom line. And we know that's not going to fly in our organization. So we're done here. And I would say, no, I don't think any party truly negotiates that way. I said, and they keep coming back. So if they really meant that this is our bottom line and this is it, and you can like it or lump it, then why do they keep coming back? They keep following up with us. They keep coming to the next meeting. They keep asking us if we'd accept, like, if you've really given us your bottom line, then the ball should be in our court, but it wasn't. So that was one way that I tried to encourage them to kind of see through that tactic. And the other one was repeated threats to conclude the negotiation. Same kind of idea is that, okay, that's it. I guess we're done here. We're walking away. It was a nice idea. Too bad it's not going to get off the ground. And, too bad, so sad. And yet they kept coming back. So I think about something that I know it's straightforward. We learn this when we're children, but deeds, not words, right? What are they doing versus what are they saying? Does it match? Is it a mismatch? And just pay careful attention to the actions in addition to the words. And also remember that sometimes the folks on their side are as uncomfortable with the tactics that they're playing as you are. So read some of that body language, and whether they tell you on the side or not of like, hey, we got to find a way to get there. I still really want to do the deal. Whether they tell you that or not, you can see their discomfort. It's palpable. So read the body language of the other folks who aren't doling out the tactics.
Right. Yeah, that's smart. Hey, Tracy, I want to ask Vanessa about different countries, different cultures, because Vanessa is an expert, at least in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And so, Vanessa, I'm curious of how all these things play out. What's different, US, Canada, UK, or maybe other countries you've been involved in? How does that play out?
Oh, yeah, it's been quite a learning journey as well. And again, I'm grateful that Holden Advisors was there to assist us along the way. It's a major undertaking to product transfer, import, export, expand your business, go for scale. It's a major, major undertaking, and it's not for the faint of heart. Um, I think if I had to kind of pick one epiphany I've had with dealing with different countries, it would be that something that is perfectly logical in one country, and it's the way we do it, and it's how all our customers behave, and it's kind of a no-brainer, doesn't mean that it's going to be perfectly logical in the other country because of customs and practices and legacy and you know, just the way they look at the world. It's not always the same. So I remember in one particular instance, we were like, they've got to come around. I mean, this is just so logical. It's so
Mhm.
obvious, right? And they just need some time to wrap their heads around it. When in actuality, we needed some time to say, we need to call this because it works in one country and it doesn't work in the other country, and we need to put our logic to the side. And that's not an easy thing to do because when something makes sense, you want to repeat it, right? So I'll give you an example. In one country, it is commonplace for customers to purchase from multiple providers and to take parts to make a whole. So that's very normal. Provider A can give you 80% of what you're looking for. Provider B can give you the other 20. You put those together and you've got your whole. So we thought, of course, that's how it's going to work in the other country. They're going to buy a percentage from one provider and a percentage from the other provider, particularly when there's differentiated services. But no, they dealt with one provider, period. And we were like, but that doesn't make sense. You could get more from both. Why wouldn't you enlarge your pie? And it's just not the way they did business. And I think we lost 6 months to that realization. So all of that to say, you certainly need to know what's worked and try to replicate what's worked, but you also need to know when to call it and say, my experience over here is not theirs, and I need to follow their lead.
hmm And it's interesting because when I asked the question, I was thinking a little bit more of a policy perspective. So you bring the cultural aspect to it, which is super important. And then there's some rule-based aspects, like what comes to mind first for me is privacy. So privacy rules are different in different countries, and if your business model doesn't line up with those privacy rules, it's like you can keep trying to pound that square peg in a round hole, or you can try to change.
Can adjust. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think what makes that even more challenging than how you just described is that the laws aren't always black and white. It's more
Mhm.
how they're interpreted and how they're applied and what's a standard practice and where there's risk aversion and where there's risk tolerance. And so it's not like you can be in a meeting and you're with a set of individuals from one country and a set of individuals from another country and say, well, here's the law. It doesn't work like that, right? It's how those laws have been interpreted and applied. So it adds more opportunities for subjective opinion rather than just objective fact.
How about, so we're talking about the customers and their perspective and how that's different. How about leading salespeople in different countries? How's that different?
Yeah, it's there's definitely nuance in the individual countries, and I find that I have to kind of shift my mindset as I'm going into different conversations, whether they be pipelines or performance reviews or whatever it is. I really, really have to take that hat off and put the next hat on and be ready for all the nuance and all the kind of spoken and unspoken and the written and the unwritten. There is a lot of differences between the countries. And it could be as simple as how people take vacations or not,
Mhm.
how who looks at their phone after 5 and who does not, or there's
Mhm.
just a lot there. And so I found myself with other leaders going, we need to remember, where the folks sit, what the practices and customs and what the norms are there. So a lot of difference between the different regions.
Yeah. I had a client once, like 10 years ago, who had an out of office up and it just said holiday. No time, no when I'll be back, no, like, here's what to do. He was
Don't
in
bother me.
Norway. Yeah, yeah. Just how you get the idea. And it's like,
Yeah.
It's so
Don't
funny.
don't call me, I'll call you.
That's right.
That's fabulous. Yeah.
That's great. I would think so, Vanessa, you're talking about like some of these companies that are more on the conservative side versus liberal, just in how they think about things. Um, I would imagine on the conservative side, you mostly have companies that have been around for a very long time, and they've got their processes and the ways that things have always been. And in that frame is probably where a lot of the very challenging negotiations happen, just in how you set up sellers to go up against that. Can you talk to us about how you work with them to get confident to go work against a system like that or work with a system like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two big things that kind of jump to mind. The first thing is, have you really sized up who's on the other side of the table or the other party or the opponent? Have you really sized them up? Because I certainly remember over my career walking into negotiations and there was probably that little voice in my head going, oh, I'm outmatched here. I am outmatched and I'm nervous and the butterflies were going in my stomach. And what I've found as I've, matured both as a negotiator, a seller, a leader, and a person is that a lot of times that was really just people throwing their weight around, where it was the weight of their 100-year organization or the weight of their annual revenue or the weight of how significant the spend would be with you. But they weren't always actually prepared for the negotiation.
Hmm.
So if you can just stick to your training, your tools, your plan that's been pre-approved before you went in, right? You know what you can and can't do. If you can stick with that, you can start to disarm that other party pretty quickly. And there was one negotiation in particular recently where I remember leaving the negotiation going, that person felt like a rookie and they're not a rookie. So
Mm.
if you can get out of your own head of this is a scary one, this is one I can't mess up, I've got to get, if you can get out of your own head and really size up what you're up against and what's working well, what are your big rocks, what are your stumbling blocks, you can really just kind of peel back the voices in your head and stick with your plan and your tools and your techniques. I remember coming out of negotiations going, wow, that was way easier than I thought.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
One of the techniques that I use sometimes, and it's not just even negotiation, it might be other situations too, is I think to myself, what would the best negotiator, the best sales leader, the best whatever do in this situation? And then it's almost like you just act like that person. What would the best negotiator do in this position? Well, okay, they'd be listening, they wouldn't be intimidated, and then you just sort of play that role. And in a minute or two, it's like you're way more comfortable than Brian walking into it or Vanessa walking into it with all the baggage that we bring with us. It's like, nah, I'm just going to be great for an hour.
Yeah. Act as if you're the best, most
There you go.
confident, most prepared. Yeah. Act
Yeah,
as
there
if.
you go. Yeah, that's
I
it.
agree.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say about that is I work really hard with my team, my extended team, to not ever give off signals of desperation. Desperation, if you think about in your personal life, desperation is not an attractive quality in your personal life, and it's not in your professional life either. So resist the urge. If you feel like, oh, gosh, if we don't get this deal done, it's the end of the world. And just give them more, just throw more money at them, do this. It's like, that's not helping anyone and least of all yourself. So I
Hmm.
really work hard on them. Okay, that's sounding a little desperate. We need to get out of that zone and we need to get back in. And that if this deal doesn't happen, the world will go on. It will continue to spin. So um, don't those feelings are very visceral and they're very obvious to the other party.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's so powerful for you as a leader to be able to exude that and communicate that. When you communicate that and say, look, we don't need to be desperate. If we don't win the deal, the world will continue to rotate, just like what you just said. Man, to an individual seller, that pressure, just that 50-pound weight on my back just came
Yes.
straight off.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, okay. So I just should go do the right thing. And my boss Vanessa tells me I can just go do the right thing. And then, okay, let's go do the right thing.
Life will go on.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that? There have been situations where I thought I lifted the 50-pound weight and it still didn't come
Mm,
off because people just
Mhm.
internalize the need to be successful so much. I get it. It's deep rooted. But I have said to individuals before, if I am not freaking out, if I am not losing sleep over this, and I am way more on the hook for this, why are you? Why? And I did have some blank stares at me of, she's right. I've got to just start sleeping again and
yeah.
being calm. And if she's not losing sleep, this is a fool's errand for me to be.
Mhm. Mhm. Super interesting. Such a good way to put it. So as you're working on their mindset, like, all right, let's get you in a good headspace, kind of healthy detachment from making sure this has to happen, the desperation. Then in terms of tools, because you've used that word a few times, can you give us an example of something like, all right, you got to go in, you got to make sure you've got this in place and this in place. It doesn't have to be like the whole set, but just something that you're like, this one's always helpful when people are freaking out about a negotiation.
100% the give gets. I find that separates the shrewd negotiator from the person throwing their weight around. Um, when you go in with give gets and they just say, and they dismiss them, they look elementary to me.
Mm,
I'm trying to work with you here, right? If you're telling me you have to have this, I'm trying to give you something that would make this more of a quid pro quo. And if you can't get there, then you just look like someone who's strong arming right now. So
Mhm.
the give gets, I always prepare them in advance and I don't always need them. But it's not lost time. It is, time very, very well spent on, again, even in the 11th hour, if someone rides in, if I've got some give gets and I've got alignment in my own organization, we can get through that really, really quickly. So that is a big one. The other one that I've worked in very, very competitive markets where there's more like a concentration of players, and we all know each other's names, and we see one another in hallways and that kind of environment. And I find that it's really, really important to impress upon partners and customers that, you are a VIP and you are important to us and we want to ride off into the sunset with you, but there needs to be some fair market pricing here as well. You're not our only partner. I don't say this to them, but you're not our only partner. You're not our only customer. We've got to maintain some levels so that we don't get into lopsided situations with similar customers. So, kind of mutual value, fair market pricing, and the give get tools I use a lot.
Yeah.
that's great.
That's great. I mean, it also feels like there's different things that are standing out to me as you're speaking. One being like, how do you make sure that you've got a fair, almost like energy balance between the people that are working together? And then there's also like, I think the design of things like give gets is how do you make sure that you're working inside of what they really value? And that is a way to help gauge that of like, is it this or this? So that you're actually working towards that partnership that you spent so much time trying to lock into place for your customers and theirs.
That's right. And it also helps ferret out, do they really care about this or
Right.
not? Or are they just looking for throw-ins to, put another feather in their cap? Or is this actually really, really material to their organization?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Last question from me. One myth in negotiations that you wish would go away.
A myth. Oh gosh, we've covered so many of them. I'm trying to think of something we haven't talked about already. Maybe I'll just double down on the that silence is bad, that giving
Mhm.
the other party a cooling period is bad. It's not. It's really, really good. I have had situations where I thought, okay, I'm definitely getting uncomfortable now. It's been more days than I thought. They must be talking themselves out of it, when in actuality, they were talking themselves into it. And
Mhm.
they were doing what they needed to get done to align more stakeholders because it was bigger and broader than they thought. So I think the myth is that cooling periods are bad, or natural breaks, pregnant pauses are bad, and they're not. One other thing I would say, I don't know if it's a myth, but it's something that I think is worth mentioning. One of the other things that I've matured a lot over the years with is when you go to say something at the same time as the other party. I always thought, well, let me just get mine out. I don't want to forget what I was about to say. No, I actually need to stop what I was going to say. I need to let the other party speak because it may change what I was about to say.
Mhm.
So I have really worked hard on when you and you're both about to go at the same time, you stop.
That's
It's
good
what
advice. Yeah. Tracy, for me, it's that the buyer does not have that huge advantage that you think they do. We think that the scale is like this, and it's so much more like that. That the playing field is a lot more level than we're led to believe. And for some of that's from experience, and some of it's from reading procurement books, listening to procurement podcasts. And you will hear, I listened to a podcast where it was two procurement folks, and the person said, well, what do you do when they try to pass along the extra price of tariffs? And the other guy said, oh, just stall. Just tell them you can't. Just tell them you don't have budget for that. And they're like, and then the other guy said, well, but what if they're a supplier you really need? Now what do we do? It's like, oh yeah, well, that's really hard because if you really need them, you don't want to lose them. I mean, try to delay, try to, make sure that they are serious about it. And then, I don't know, like you got to pay for it because you need that supplier. But as salespeople, we don't ever hear the second part of that conversation, only hear the first
Yeah.
part. And it's like, oh, shoot, now what am I going to do?
Yeah. They
A
need you.
100%. And I think if I circle that back to one of my earlier points,
Yeah.
that's the throwing weight around. The weight is being
Mm,
thrown around like this kind of strong arm posture, but in actuality, they really need you too. And that's
yes.
why you're there, because you're the leader in a particular service in your industry, or you're the incumbent and they don't want to go through all the change, or whatever the case may be. They're there because they need you too. And it's important to remember. Totally agree, Brian.
Yeah.
Wise words. All right. Thank you both. Great episode. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Good stuff.
Yeah. This is great, Vanessa. Thanks so much. That was really good. It was fun. And it was, I mean, I was genuinely curious about some of
Yeah,
these things
great.
because we hadn't talked about them all. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, yeah, but what do you do in another country? And what do you, yeah.
Really
So
I'm
cool.
so
that's
glad.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so
Really
glad.
cool.
And again, I really, really value Holden Advisor's part on my journey. It has been a learning journey. It has been transformation. I do things now that I didn't think I would ever be doing in my career. So
Cool.
I really owe you guys a debt of gratitude. Thank you so much.
That's awesome. Thank
Sweet.
you. Yeah, it's
That's
great working.
great.